Machine gunning, hot spotting, latency, piezo, dual zone, single zone. What do all these terms mean? Electronic drummers use them a lot, but they don't always stop to say, oh, that's what this actually means. That's what this video is for. That's coming up. What's up? Justin here. Welcome to 65 Drums, the place to keep on top of all things electronic drum related. So in the description of this video, you'll see a list of all the words I'm talking about along with the descriptions and links to videos I've done, because I've done over 150 videos on this channel. So there are a bunch of words that I've actually dedicated an entire video to explaining. So let's start off with term number one, piezo. Or piezo. People say it differently. That's a small metallic disc that does the majority of sensing throughout your drum set. So you can't see it because it's covered with a square of foam on this edrum drum pad right here. And then there's another one on the inside of the drum shell right here that senses when you hit the rim of that drum. And something like a rubber pad, there's a piezo inside of here as well. It's in the center right here, somewhere around here. And it's just hidden underneath a giant layer of rubber. Piezos are the workhorse of electronic drums, and it's the hidden thing that makes electronic drums work. Next word is latency. Latency is the distance and time between you hitting the drum and actually hearing a sound coming out of your speakers or your headphones. This is measured in milliseconds. So something like a Roland drum module or certain other brands, they'll have really low latency, maybe 3 milliseconds or something. And then you'll have other brands like Yamaha that have higher latency, closer to 8 milliseconds or something. I don't remember the specific numbers, but there is a range depending on different drum modules. And when you're using drum software, latency becomes a problem because you're sending messages to your drum module from the drum pad, and then from your drum module to the drum software, and then from the drum software to your headphones. So when you have more and more moving pieces, latency gets higher and higher. And if latency is too high, then it messes with the feel of your electronic drums. The next word is triggering or trigger. That's basically when you hit the drum pad, your piezo senses the drum hit and sends an electrical pulse to the drum module. An electronic drum trigger is completely different. I know they sound the same, but they're completely different. A trigger, noun is this little thing or this thing right here. This is a sensor that you can fit onto any acoustic drum and turn it into an electronic drum. There's a sensor like this in every single drum, and at the base of all of it is a piezo like this. Here's one that confuses a lot of people: samples. A sample is a recording of a sound. And for our purposes, that's basically when you hit an electronic drum pad, you're going to hear a sound of some guy in 2007 who recorded himself hitting a snare. And that's stored onto a drum module, and you're just playing back that recording of that guy hitting that drum in 2007. So that's what a sample is. Also, you can load samples onto drum modules depending on the brand and the situation. When we're talking about multi-layered samples, we're talking about different velocities. So we'll hear a collection, basically. We'll hear a sample for your soft hits versus your loud hits. A lot of drum modules, when you load a sample onto it, you're hearing a one-shot sample. A one-shot sample just is one sound, no matter how hard or how soft you hit that drum. Multi-layered samples are the complete opposite. Here's everyone's favorite phrase: machine gunning. Machine gunning is basically when you hit a drum and you're playing it, about the same velocity. You're gonna hear the same sound being played over and over and over again, sort of like a machine gun. It's gonna sound mechanical almost. Because when you're playing an acoustic drum, you're gonna hear a lot of different pitch variations and it sounds a lot more natural. With electronic drums, if you've got a really cheapo electronic drum module that only has a handful of sounds to represent a sonar snare or a Gretsch snare, if you only have a handful of sounds to represent that snare, you're going to end up hearing that one of those samples, one of the 3 or 5 samples being played over and over again, and it sounds like a machine gun. That's what the term means. This next one is a port on the back of your drum module. It's called Aux In. On some drum modules, it's called mix in. You're going to have a port on the back of your drum module, and you're going to also have a volume knob on the front of your drum module. The most common use of this is to plug in a cell phone to your drum module so you can play along to your favorite artist. On some drum modules, you'll need an adapter because on certain models, you'll get an 1/8 inch port, which is great because you can just use a standard aux cable. On other drum modules, like my Roland TD30 behind me, I have a 1/4 inch input. So I have to have a 1/4 inch to 1/8 inch adapter, and then the aux cord, and then a dongle because I have an iPhone 7. RIP headphone jack. The next two words are kind of sort of the same thing. First one, responsiveness. Responsiveness is how well a drum set reacts to your playing. This is a combination of your drum module and your drum pad. But one aspect of responsiveness is, how sensitive is it? How hard do I have to hit before the drum pad acknowledges that I'm actually hitting it? And then when you've got dynamic range, which is another phrase I use a lot in my reviews, it's basically a way for me to describe how well a drum set reacts to the whole range of my playing, from the really soft hits to the medium hits to the loud hits. One big weakness with electronic drums is a lot of modules, they have a great range of hard sounding hits and soft hits for a certain cymbal or a certain drum. But then the mid-range, there's not a big mid-range, because with an acoustic drum set, when you're playing, you're not going to be playing really, really loud the entire time. You're going to be playing with medium strength hits a lot, and there's a big range of sound in that medium zone. But with a lot of electronic drums, you got your soft hits, your loud hits, and then a handful of options right there in the middle in that center velocity zone. Here's a section of the drum module that gets a lot of people confused. When someone new to electronic drums comes and buys a drum set and they get all excited because they want to put a crash cymbal on tom number 1 and they want to put a cowbell on tom number 2, what you're looking for is the instrument list. This is a list of every sound your drum module has. A lot of drum modules have something like 800 or 1,000 sounds, and they're all on this one list called the instrument list. So what you'll want to do is hit the drum you want to edit, because hitting that drum selects it in the drum module, and then go to the list and just scroll through all the sounds and find the one you want. The next term is zones. You'll hear dual zone, single zone, triple zone. It's basically a way of describing how many sounds a pad can trigger. So on this, hi-hat pad right here, yes, this is a hi-hat pad. On this hi-hat pad, it's a dual zone pad. So there's a zone here on the edge and a zone here up top. I can program a separate sound to the edge and the top of this pad. The next term is positional sensing. This one confuses a lot of people for some reason, but it's really, really simple. It's basically a roll-in feature on some of their drum sets where it senses if you're hitting near the edge of the drum or in the center, and then it produces a sound accordingly, because there's a pitch shift on acoustic drums, of course, when you're hitting the center of a drum versus the edge. It just sounds different, and Roland assigns a sound accordingly. And that brings us to the term supernatural. This is a buzz term by Roland, and it used to be Cosm was their word, but now it's supernatural. It's kind of like a marketing thing to get people to remember Roland and the fact that they have certain advantages in certain areas over other brands. It's basically a combination of whatever Roland is doing at the moment. So for example, on their website, Roland cites mesh heads as being part of their supernatural technology. Also, all of the virtual stuff you can do is a big part of the supernatural engine. Basically, shell depth, shell thickness or cymbal thickness or drum head, all the virtual mic placement stuff. There's a sample on the bottom of that. They're using a recording of a drum. They're just heavily modifying it. And when they're modifying it, that sort of gives it this Roland sound that some people love and some people hate. It's really up to you. But that's what supernatural is. It's basically all of the unique things that Roland is doing that most other companies don't do. Because on most drum modules, all you can do is change the pitch up and down and add some reverb. That's it. Roland does give you a lot of control, but there is an effect that does have on the sound that some people like and that some people don't. I'm guessing the digital snare, where it senses the static electricity in your hands, along with that new ride cymbal where it senses the static electricity in your hands, I'm assuming all that is under the umbrella of supernatural drums as well. All right, let's go on to something a little more simple. Drum pad. A drum pad is basically any electronic drum pad. I don't think people usually call something that's been modified from an acoustic instrument to electronic. I don't think you'd call this humongous tom a drum pad, but you would call this a drum pad. You could probably call this a drum pad. You could call rubber pads drum pads. And it's basically a way for us to talk about electronic drums and know that we're talking about electronic drums and not just acoustic drums in general. Also, the fact that electronic drum components are just so shallow most of the time, they look like a pad, so that's why they're electronic drum pads. Let's talk about threshold for a second. It's a little bit confusing if you don't know what it is, but it's really actually pretty simple. It's basically you telling your drum module how it's going to react to your drum pad. If you set it to threshold 20, you're gonna have to hit that pad really, really hard before your drum module acknowledges that you actually hit it. If you set it to 0, if you just tap it, it will sense that you hit it. Sensitivity, on the other hand, is basically you telling the drum set how to handle how you're playing. So if you crank up the sensitivity to 30, no matter how softly you hit, it's gonna act as if you would hit it with all of your might. If you set the sensitivity to 0, it's gonna be really hard to get a sound out of it at all. You're gonna have to really hack into it just to get a little peep from that drum set. This brings us to something that's a little bit more complicated to explain, but it's trigger curves. This is a setting in a lot of drum modules that's sort of like sensitivity, but not really. Let me explain it like this. If you're doing a drum roll and you're gradually starting to play louder, the trigger curve for that would be like this, loud to soft, a very gradual progression from loud to soft. Meanwhile, if you set the trigger curve to something like loud 2, instead of being this gradual progression from soft to loud, a little more natural like that, instead loud 2 would basically be like this. It would be this really sharp uptick. It's sort of like cranking the sensitivity all the way up. No matter how soft you play, it's probably gonna come out of the drum set as if you'd hit it really, really hard. If your drum set just isn't feeling very natural, mess with the sensitivity and trigger curves. It's basically the way you tell your drum set to respond to your playing. If you're a really soft hitter, you might do different settings than if you're a really hard hitter. The next term is VST. VST stands for Virtual Studio Technology. When someone talks about a drum VST, it's not really a technically correct way to refer to what they're referring to, but they're just talking about drum software, a virtual instrument. Drum software is basically a virtual drum module that's living on your laptop instead of in a dedicated box. You're gonna have to have your dedicated box talking to the drum software via a MIDI cable to your laptop. But yeah, it's basically a virtual drum module on your laptop. The great thing about drum software is that it just sounds better than drum modules. Like 99% of drum modules out there, drum software sounds better than all of them. And the last term is crosstalk. Crosstalk is when you hit one pad, for example, a crash cymbal over here, and for some reason your floor tom underneath it triggers as if you'd hit it, even though you didn't hit it. That's because when you hit that cymbal really hard, the vibration is going down the drum rack over to the drum pad. Your drum pad is like shaking a little bit, and your drum module sees that vibration and they think that you hit it as like a ghost note. So one way to fix this is by raising the threshold a little bit. It'll sort of like ignore those really, really subtle hits. There's a setting inside of your drum module called X-Talk that will help you dial in and fix this issue altogether. I think I made a dedicated video on this once. I'll link it down in the description below. Go check the description. I listed out all the words I talked about in this video along with the definitions and links to videos I did on different topics that we talked about today. Even though I'm trying to say things as simply as I can, there's just this whole language of electronic drummers that just goes over the heads of someone brand new to electronic drums. I mean, if you just played acoustic drums your entire life and you heard someone talking about machine gunning and dual zone and trigger curves and all that stuff, well, I mean, is there a good reason why you would actually know the definitions to that stuff? Not really. So that's what this video is hopefully trying to fix. Again, if you've got more terms you want me to cover, leave them down in the comments below. I might make a part 2. Hope you guys have an awesome day, and I'll see you guys in a few.